Hi all, this is Skate, or as my name in this video suggests, Skatey McSkaterson, and I am platooned in this one with Bushka McBushkason. So, as promised in my first video back, here is some Vk100.01 footage. So this footage is from the Twister Cup weekend. Me and Bushka sat playing these tanks and the Scorpion G at the time, and we just loved them. In fact, we sat there just laughing, thinking this thing's completely overcooked. And as it happens, Wargaming have come out recently and gone, hey, guess what guys? The Vk100.01 is overcooked. And of course, the natural response there, once a gaming company has said, okay, we admit it, we may have overcooked this one, the natural reaction is, so when's it getting a nerf? And the response is, it's not. And the reason being, quite simply, it's not very popular. So, quick comparative. When Wargaming are buffing and nerfing tanks, obviously as some of you know, they look at just 55% to 65% average win rate players. So the first natural logic or assumption would be, well, that means anything around 60% between a 55 and 56% player is balanced by their standard. Yet, as a comparative for you, the IS-3 Defender currently has just under 60% win rate in that category of players. This thing has 62. That, by the way, is the highest of any tier 8 heavy tank. On top of that, this thing has more than 300 average damage more than any other tier 8 heavy. In other words, yes, this thing is a little bit overpowered, just a little bit. But Wargaming won't nerf it until it becomes more popular, so they can then re-evaluate the statistics. All that said and done, that doesn't mean this tank is completely godlike and can't be taken care of. If someone doesn't drive it correctly, it's very, very easy to take it out, with the biggest weak spot on it, in my opinion, that front lower plate. It's huge. But I also think that lower plate is easy to negate and stop it being a weak spot. As an example, in that situation I was in there, I was shooting tanks at the back, and I was shooting them first, and the reason being is they had more likelihood of being able to hit my lower plate. All the others, they could not because of their positioning, which only gave them the turret to aim at. In the situation I was in, for those tanks, my lower plate was hidden, and I was using the 8 degrees gun depression this super heavy German has. Now for a tank at tier 8 which has this armour, that gun, and pretty good mobility for a tank which is meant to be that heavy, 8 degrees of gun depression is also very, very impressive. And if you cannot or do not want to get into a situation where you are side scraping, you can use that gun depression to pop ridges and hide your lower plate in the process, which again only gives them that turret or hatch to shoot at. I mean, look at this game. I pretty much went headfirst up to that spot and just absorbed damage. I absorbed 3,700 plus damage. That's actually enough to kill this tank twice over. That's pretty ridiculous if you ask me. But I've mentioned the lower plate, and in my opinion that is the biggest weak spot, so you've either got to hide that thing via side scraping, or you've got to hide that thing via using the gun depression. That's kind of like my step 1 when trying to get this thing into a position. Step 2 is dealing with the front cheeks and the hatch, because they are pennable. Doesn't mean they're not well armoured, but they are pennable. I mean, you can pen the hatch, even though it is still pretty well armoured, and you can pen the cheeks, just like on a mouse. My opinion, however, is the cheeks on this, tier for tier, are better than the cheeks on mouse. And that's because the turret tapers in and the cheeks are smaller. And it's really easy to get a lot of bounces from the turret on this thing. You don't angle it all the way to the left like you would with a mouse. You point at the target and you give it a wiggle left and right, or you just keep moving back and forth. You'll notice on that hill, I never sat still. And the reason I never sat still is because it makes it a nightmare to hit those little cheeks. Which, like I said, allowed me to do 3,500 damage, but also block 3,700 damage. Now, in terms of maximising armour on tanks, can you really get any easier than that? Step 1, hide the lower plate the best way you can. Step 2, wiggle. That's it. And in that circumstance, you just bounce over and over. Yes, you will get the occasional pen, but I tell you what, pens in comparison to just sitting there is just nuts. They're just 2 simple steps, and you've maximised this armour to the best you can and made it ridiculous. And then we come on to that 128mm gun. Logic in my head would be, oh, well, it's a super heavy at tier 8, therefore the gun is going to be appalling. It's not, though. I mean, you've got a 128mm, which is putting out the same damage per minute as something like an IS-6. Or as another comparative, only 100 damage per minute less than an IS-5. And they have way less armour, and way less reliability on their armour. And then you've got virtually the same penetration. One's got 221, this has got 220. And then where this tank is better, if you ask me, 460 alpha comparison to your 400 alpha. It's just making big holes while absorbing damage for your team. So those figures on the gun don't sound bad. And then you go, oh yeah, but I bet you it can't hit anything for love nor money. Well, actually, it's got better accuracy than all of them. It's just stupid. 0.38 gun dispersion. As a comparative, 0.389 on the IS-5, 0.381 on the IS-3 Defender. Oh, your aim time's also a lot better, your gun depression's a lot better, and your accuracy on the move is a lot better. It actually cracks me up just thinking about all those things. I'm not even done there. If you compare me to something like an IS-5 or even an IS-3 Defender, this thing's got better view range as well. Yes, it's got slightly less hit points, but to be honest, do you care when you've got that much armour? The only other thing then, they do win on one category, and that one category that the Russians would win on would be, very, very simply, the mobility. And this thing only has a 20 km/h top speed, but to be honest, really don't care in the slightest with that sort of thing. And in the grand scheme of it, the traverse speed isn't that bad either, which allows you to spin the tank quite quickly. And that's thanks to its 1,320 horsepower engine. And that pretty much sums up what you would expect if you haven't driven this tank yet. Now I know someone's going to be already writing in the comments going, ah yeah, but it's easy to pen from the side and the butt. Well yeah, obviously. That's expected. That's not the tank's fault though, that's our fault for letting someone get on our butt. But in terms of jumping in a tier 8 tank and being able to easily manipulate the armour, easy steps. A, hide lower plate. B, wiggle. Can it get any easier than that to try and manipulate armour? As you'll see from this replay and the last one, the only time I stay still is very simply when I'm aiming my shot. And I know what you're thinking, is he really trying to camp out? No, I'm not. I've got a wall in front of me, which means I'm in a very strong position with my lower plate hidden, and it puts the focus on me. It means that these tanks aren't looking for Bushka in his Scorpion, and they're not looking for the medium tank. They're looking at me, because if they don't look at me, then they're going to lose on a cap. And it's not, again, something I'm even worried about, because I have this wall to protect my lower plate. It means I can pop out, take shots, come back in. Look, it's like the wall is shaped perfectly to hide a VK behind it. I've only just noticed that. It is a VK-shaped wall. Could I have found a better spot to put this tank in? There's another bounce. That's the second bounce, by the way, from that T95. Which so far puts us on around 3,000 blocked and 4,100 damage done. I'm hoping to get a little bit more done if I can get there in time. The only thing I'd say which you need to be very, very careful of with this tank is multiple targets from multiple angles. Your job as the driver would be to make sure that your big squishy butt is not a focal point or a target. And if you sit back in a game for too long, A, you're playing a super heavy wrong, and B, you're allowing that opportunity by reducing the amount of team players you have. By sitting somewhere and being in the thick of it, or at least getting busy right from the get-go, you're reducing the chance of having multiple targets get you without support or cover. In the end, on that one, we did 4,600 damage and just shy of 3,000 damage blocked. And that pretty much sums up the VK for me. Very easy to drive, very easy to manipulate, and very good fun at bouncing things. Hope you've enjoyed the video, guys. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye bye.